There you are, lovely people. Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. During late 2021, countless thousands of dead and dying crabs and other crustaceans washed up on 40 miles of the shoreline of the North East and North Yorkshire. Various explanations have been suggested for the event, described as catastrophic, including disease, a parasite infestation, or man-made pollution. But more than a year later, the government concedes the cause may never be known. Joining me now is Gary Caldwell, Senior Lecturer in Applied Marine Biology at Newcastle University, to reflect on what we do and do not know. And also with me is Joe Redfern, who's a marine biologist and a fisherman in Whitby, which is one of the areas that's been affected. Good evening, both.
Good evening.
First of all, just to get to the heart of the matter, give us a sense of the scale of the catastrophe. Joe.
Yes, over to me. Yeah, it's been devastating for our fishing communities, especially those centred around the Tees estuary. You're talking 90% down in catch rates. There's already 10 fishing boats and fishing businesses gone up for sale. Difficult for vessels to keep crew. And it's not only an impact to the economics in their business, but also to the well-being and mental health of the fishing community. It's just a struggle to keep faith for the future when you're seeing scenes like that where hundreds of thousands of crabs and lobsters and that make up the bread and butter of the income for the fishing industry are dead, washed up on the beach.
Gary, what species were affected?
There were mainly edible crab and lobster, but there were also the common shore crab and some of the velvet swimming crabs, mainly the true crabs and lobsters. So effectively the big crustaceans that you would see when you were going along the seashore or what you would expect to buy when you go into a seafood restaurant. And
how long did I've seen it called a die-off, how long did the die-off last? Or is it still going on?
Well, it's quite a sophisticated question. So initially, it was a massive wash-up of dead crustaceans over a very short period of time. And that sort of tailed off over the following month. And we think of that as the first really big striking die-off that happened. But subsequently, there have been smaller incidents throughout the year after that. But really, we're focusing on that initial big die-off that more or less wiped out the local crustacean population.
And what are the possible causes? I know there's been a lot of investigation, a lot of reports commissioned and written. Who are the likely suspects?
So initially, the TEFRA, which is government's science body, they blamed the natural cause of a harmful algal bloom. The fishermen, who are very familiar with the waters and the nature and the seasonality of the seas, challenged that because it didn't quite make sense to them. And they commissioned their own reports, which indicated that there could be a source of industrial pollution. And it's that point that we then came into the scene with a group of 3 other northern universities and started asking that question, was industrial pollutant part of it? And we narrowed that down to a single chemical called pyridine. And we engaged in a lot of intensive work trying to understand that, both trying to get our heads around the toxicity of pyridine to crabs and lobsters, and then trying to map how that pyridine would have been transported down the coast. Now, subsequently, more recently, another report's been released that has actually indicated that they believe there's a third cause, which I think is a pathogen, a disease. However, in this case, there is no direct evidence for it, and they admit that in the report. So really, this third explanation of a disease phenomena or a parasite or a pathogen has no actual scientific basis. So we're still, as a group of universities, we're still asking more questions about the industrial pollution side of things and trying to tease a little bit more detail around that.
Joe, as a fisherman, what's your diagnosis or what decision do you come down on the side of?
Well, it was strange when we saw the first wash-ups. Usually when there's a wash-up on the beach, you can point that towards a storm or some clear event, where this was just such a mystery. That people have been fishing these waters for 50 years, have never seen anything like it. And everything we've observed has been centered around the Tees estuary. So with the fishing community, have looked always towards that Tees estuary as being the source. And also when we saw that first big die-off that Gary talked about, it coincided with a huge dredging operation in the mouth of the Tees. So the fishing community are convinced that it's come from that pollution, and that's backed up by the science that's been provided by the universities.
Gary, that sounds credible. If as Joe says, if people have been fishing, not noticing anything like this for 5 decades, then there's a huge dredging operation. Surely it does seem likely that some sort of pollution from the coal mining industry or something that's been dormant in the sediment could readily have been kicked up into the water that the animals are in.
I agree, and that's the basis that we've done our work. Scientists, everything we do has got to be evidence-based. Absolutely everything. There's no room for speculation. And over the work we did, we've presented that evidence. We've collected the toxicity data for the chemical, and we think one of the key chemicals involved is a chemical called pyridine, which is an industrial chemical that has a very long heritage of release into the river, both accidental and deliberate. And we've shown from our work that pyridine is very toxic to crabs and lobsters, much, much more so than, say, to fish, for example. And so kind of that evidence all stacks up, because the pyridine can also be attached onto the sediment grains whenever the dredger releases the dredged sediment, and then that will be transferred down the coast, hugging very closely to the seabed. Good way to imagine this, Neil, is if you think you go into a nightclub and they turn on that dry ice machine and you got that cloud of dry ice hugging along the floor, moving along. And that kind of situation where you're a crab or a lobster on the seabed, you've got this cloud of toxic material very, very close to the seabed coming your way, and you can't avoid it. And this chemical that we are particularly interested in actually attacks the crabs from the outside. It doesn't even need to get inside the crabs to kill them. It attacks little receptors on their walking legs and their claws, which they use to track down food. And it attacks those, and it overexcites the nerve cells, so it becomes a bit like a neurotoxin. And then it triggers them to go into a kind of convulsion, and they twitch and they convulse, and then they die in a matter of hours. It's a very fast, aggressive death.
Joe, what hopes of recovery? You've got your families, a whole industry there. You're so badly affected. What talk is there? Any talk of compensation or any redress for what's happened?
No, we've never talked about compensation. It's never been the drive, of the campaign from the fishermen to try and understand what happened has always been the first priority, and to make sure that the pollution is stopped before there's any talk of recovery. We can talk all day about trying to rebuild the habitat or to rebuild these populations, but without stopping the pollution first, it will be a waste of time. And unfortunately, there's a new round of dredging to start on Monday, which most coastal communities are terrified is going to cause the same amount of death and destruction as we saw in 2021.
A dreadful story there, a dreadful outcome. Joe Redfern, fisherman, and marine biologist Gary Caldwell, thank you for bringing that to us. And it's definitely a story we'll keep an eye on if, as you say, Joe, there's more dredging to take place in the same area. But thank you for your time so far. After which we'll find out more about whether the